thank you so much for joining us here tonight for our event with Lilly Dancyger, author of Negative Space, and Alia Volz, author of Home Baked, Marijuana and the Stoning of San Francisco. My name is Evan Karp. I'm the events manager for Booksmith. We're an independent bookstore and a mainstay of San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury district since 1976. Thank you all so much for joining us. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's stars. Lilly Dancyger is a contributing editor at Catapult and assistant editor at Bureau House Books. She's the author of Negative Space, a reported and illustrated memoir selected by Carmen Maria Machado as one of the winners of the 2019 Santa Fe Writers Project Literary Awards, and the editor of Burn It Down, a critically acclaimed anthology of essays on women's anger from the Awesome Seal Press. Her writing has been published by Longreads, The Washington Post, Glamour, Playboy, Rolling Stone, and more. She lives in New York City, and you can find her on Twitter at Lilly Dancyger. Alia Volz is the author of Home Baked, My Mom, Marijuana, and the Stoning of San Francisco, which is a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award in Autobiography and winner of the 2020 Golden Poppy Award for Nonfiction from the California Independent Bookseller Alliance. Her essays are widely published, including in the New York Times, Bon Appetit, Guernica, the Best Women's Travel Writing, and the Best American Essays. Her family story has been featured on Snap Judgment, Criminal, and NPR's Fresh Air. Thank you both, Lilly and Alia, so much for being here, and congratulations on your books, and thanks for being here with us tonight. Everybody, welcome and enjoy. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Evan.
Thank you so much, Evan, and Booksmith. What would we do without great indies like Booksmith? I'm so happy to be doing this. Yeah. And man, Lilly, I'm just so in love with your book. So this is really an honor to be part of the launch a little bit. I'm just going to read something very short from the beginning of my book so that you will see some of our overlaps, I suppose. This will be brief. When I was 9, my public elementary school participated in a program best known by the slogan, "Dare to keep kids off drugs." It was one of Nancy Reagan's pet projects, a prong of her Just Say No campaign. One afternoon per week, the entire 4th grade crowded into the cafeteria where a uniformed policeman lectured us about the perils of narcotics like marijuana. We learned techniques for deflecting peer pressure and identifying and avoiding dealers, and we broke into groups to play act situations. I was careful to follow the program's script. I knew how to keep a secret. At home, there were giant black garbage bags of Mendocino shake crammed into the closet of our spare bedroom, along with pounds of fragrant manicured buds sealed in gallon Ziplocs. My mom had operated Sticky Fingers brownies, a massive, profoundly illegal marijuana edibles business, since before I was born. Throughout my infancy, she and her partners distributed upward of 10,000 brownies per month. It was the first known business of its kind to operate at that scale in California. By the age of 9, I was helping my mom bake and individually wrap brownies on weekends. Sometimes I tagged along on deliveries after school. We were the people the cop warned my class about. By 1987, the year of my first DARE lessons, AIDS was ravaging my hometown. People I loved as surrogate aunties and uncles were suffering gruesome, agonizing illnesses. Cannabis eased their discomfort and helped curb the deadly wasting syndrome. After school deliveries had become tours of sick beds. I'd been my mom's accomplice since I was in the stroller. Some of my earliest flashes of memory are from brownie runs back when San Francisco had a Technicolor glow. I grew up believing that it was made of my hometown, that there was no difference between me and the place I was born. My family's secrets sometimes isolated me from other kids, but secrets also act as a bonding agent between those in the know. I was never neglected like some hippie children were. I was fawned over, encouraged, welcomed into the conspiracy. An outcast at school, I was inner circle within the Sticky Fingers world, the coolest of the cool kids. And wherever we lived, the inner sanctum of the inner circle was my mom's king-size bed, nicknamed the Barge. Many customers became trusted friends. She'd invite them aboard and they'd sprawl sideways or belly down and converse for hours unpacking relationship troubles, planning career changes, swapping stories. Equal parts therapist couch, executive boardroom, and ladies' lounge, the barge was a place for sharing and intimacy. It was also where my mom counted stacks of hundreds and fifties. I'll end it there. I want to hear from Lily.
It's great. Thank you so much, Alia. I really appreciate you being here and doing this event with me, and yeah, getting to put our books in direct conversation, which they already very much are on their own. I have a little bit about Dare too, but I wanted to read a part that's set in San Francisco tonight, in honor of the Booksmith. This is very much a New York book, even though big chunks of it take place in San Francisco. So I wanted to just pick one of those sections. And I'll read a short passage. I have a clear as a photograph memory of looking up at the San Francisco Armory, the red bricks jutting out of the tall, imposing building, contrasting with the bright, sharp blue of the California afternoon sky. That Technicolor glow I'm talking about. The strongest, clearest part of the memory is just that image, a flash. But I also remember, in a more watery, distant way, that while I was looking up at those red bricks and that blue sky, my mother was trying to explain inpatient rehab to me without explicitly saying what it was. By this point, at 7 years old, I had started to piece together snippets of overheard conversation and understood, in the way children do, that there was some secret trouble in our lives. I might need to go away for a little while to learn how to be a better mommy, she said. I kept looking up at the sky, but I held her hand a little tighter in case she intended to leave right that minute. I told her she was already a good mommy. I could do better, she responded, gently squeezing my fingers in hers. She didn't end up checking herself in, but I still remember that conversation as a turning point. It was her way of telling me that she was committing, for real, to getting clean. Telling me what was going on without going into gory details. She couldn't bring herself to leave me for long enough to check into rehab, so she started working her outpatient program harder than ever instead. I remember the methadone clinic. It was on a side street somewhere in the Tenderloin, facing the back of a Chinese restaurant with a vent that was always pumping out fryer smoke. She brought me with her a few times, but one trip sticks out in my mind. I was happy to go along because we'd stopped at Toys R Us on the way, and my mother had bought me a plastic genie doll. She was about a third the height of a Barbie and had a blonde ponytail and a pink veil over her face like Barbara Eden from Nick at Night. And she came with a magic carpet accessory that her feet clipped into. I swooped the magic carpet carrying the genie down the street, past the vent, and through the nondescript double glass doors into the smell of antiseptic and desperation. There were a few linoleum steps up to the waiting room where we sat in the vinyl seats of 2 wooden chairs that were bolted to the floor. I was still playing with my doll, and a woman sitting across from us smiled at me. She looked tired, and her pink lipstick wasn't all inside the lines. She held her purse with both hands, clutching it so tightly that it hovered above her lap. A nurse came out and called my mother's name, and she stood up, turning to me. "I'll be right back," she said, leaning in to point a finger in my face. "Stay right there. Don't get out of that chair, and don't talk to anyone." As soon as she followed the nurse into the back room, I turned around and knelt on my chair so my genie could fly higher. I turned in a circle and made magical whooshing noises. When I'd spun all the way around and was facing forward again, the woman with the lipstick asked me, "What have you got there?" "It's a genie," I told her. I was usually shy around strangers, but I hadn't gotten a chance to show off my new toy to anyone yet, and I couldn't resist. "Wow," she said, smiling but already not really paying attention. She started rummaging through her purse, dumping its contents onto her lap as I told her about the magic carpet. There was a pack of cigarettes, that lipstick she was so bad at applying, and a spoon. She continued rummaging and finally pulled out the lighter she must have been looking for. I continued telling her all about how fast the carpet could fly and how my genie could get all the way to New York in 5 minutes. And when I got a carpet big enough, I was going to go back there because that's where I was from. And then my mother came out and grabbed me by the hand, pulling me quickly outside. Yanking me behind her down the street, she said, "Don't ever talk to ladies who carry spoons in their purses." I'll stop there.
That's such an amazing line. Presumably from a woman who has at times carried a spoon in her purse.
Yeah.
As I said, I have so much love for this book, and for me, I mean, obviously, I relate a lot to the alternative culture, the alternative parenting, the experience of being the only kid in a room full of adults. I think we both write about that. But more than all of that is the experience of growing up in a household of artists.
Mhm.
I felt like you captured that so beautifully, and it really is a unique thing. So you have this line that I marked that I had to go back and like read and read and read. Everyone inherits their parents' stories, their baggage, the symbols through which they interpret life. But perhaps this is especially true and inescapable for the children of artists who are steeped in it and surrounded by it in such a literal sense, growing up in homes decorated with tangible pieces of our parents' psyches externalized. And of course, I'm reading that from my mom's.
Yeah, we're like both sitting with our parents' work.
But I'm really fascinated in your handling of the art's such a big part of this book, and it guides the narratives. It guides the narrative in so many ways. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how it directed your investigation and the writing.
Yeah. I mean, the art was where it all started. You know, the art was my way into the story, and it kind of remained the core of it, even as the rest of the story that I was telling kept shifting and changing genre and changing scope and changing structure over and over and over again over many years. The art remained unchanged. You know, it always was there, and it always, you know, as I wrote about, there was no more of it being made. You know, his portfolio is what it is, and it's finite at this point. And once I had kind of put it in order and put together the storyline of the artwork, you know, which I started to think of as one of the narrative threads of the book, that was the thread that the rest of the story can organize itself around. You know, so it was, the investigation started with trying to contextualize the art and trying to put together the story of my father's life when he was making the different pieces, and trying to kind of decode that narrative thread that was in images rather than in words. And then the rest kind of just grew out from there over the course of a decade.
It also seems, one of the other things that I love so much about this book is how the questions that you're asking of the narrative, of the material that you're uncovering, they keep changing, and you do such an exquisite job of expressing how the question changes at each stage. And I also notice at places that the relationship to the artwork changes, and the relationship to the symbolism. So there are times when the narrator kind of takes on the mantle of the rabbit phase, or the deer and the deer phase, and it's like trying on these artistic inquiries to see if it fits the story.
I love that way of putting it. Yeah.
I just think that it's so beautiful. So I know you grew up with crayons in your hand. I mean, I'm sure you can.
And, you know, yeah, the fancy stuff mostly.
Was there a time that you considered visual art as your direction?
Not in any professional way. I think it just was always there, you know, and it just was always an activity to be done. And that was just like what we did with our time, you know, was make stuff and draw. And that's what my dad was doing. So it's what I wanted to do. But I guess I knew that I never was going to put the effort that it took to get good enough for that to be my thing. You know, I think in a way I was maybe in the shadow of my father a little bit, and, you know, seeing how rigorous he was with his craft, and knowing that it wasn't just something he just picked up and did. It was what he was doing constantly.
Because writing is so easy.
I mean, sure. No, but I guess the way into it felt more natural for me. You know, rigorously reading and trying to explain things and trying to understand things in words felt more like something that I could do and do forever and potentially do well, whereas like I still draw sometimes for fun, when I need a
Relaxing.
break. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because still, intellectually stimulating, and it still feels like I'm engaging. But yeah, it never swept me along quite the same way.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've sometimes thought, so both of my parents are artists and they work in very different styles. And there was a time when I thought I was going to do visual art, but it seemed like everything I did was either an imitation of one parent or like a pushing against their style or copying their style. I couldn't just do my own thing with so much input creatively.
Yeah.
But then of course I take up writing and I end up writing a book about my parents. So
Right. Yeah. I think my father experienced a little bit of that too. His father was also a painter.
Yeah.
He was very traditional and, rigid about how things were done, and a friend of one of the people I interviewed, a friend of my father's, said that, when he met my dad in art school, he was doing these very kind of stuffy still lifes that I think were, he was following his father's rules, and it took him some time to grow into his own style.
My favorite concepts that comes up in this book is an invented word of your papa's, obtainium.
Yes.
Can you tell us what obtainium is?
Yeah, found material. And I love that he and his friends gave it this, its own official name, obtainium. Anything that you found that was cool that maybe you could make something out of. Which, that was such a big part of just who he was and what our home ended up looking like, was just his constant collecting of obtainium. And he also, he had a shelf that was called the cool stuff shelf that was just exactly that. Just whatever he had found that was cool.
Is it, I mean, I see it as being part of the research process also, and part of the experience of being a memoirist and a research, especially a research-driven memoirist, is finding finding what is beautiful. He collects roadkill. He uses carcasses. Things are spiky and dangerous and weird, but all of it is grist for the creative mill, which is so relatable to the writing process, I find.
Absolutely.
And here you're using his pieces.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I think there's a little delay. Yeah, that was something that was a parallel that I wasn't aware of going into it, but kind of partway through, I started to realize, like, wait, I'm doing that same thing. I'm collecting and hoarding and collecting these things that are maybe ugly and scary to make something out of them. And that's exactly what he did. It was kind of a cool, weird moment of realizing that I had been swept up in exactly the same thing that I was trying to document.
I love the kind of circular nature of many of the revelations in this book. How you'll be chasing a thread and realize at a point that you're chasing your own tail, or that it was that the way that it cycles back on itself. You're talking about obtainium, and of course you're obtaining, and of course you're making these things. And I found that really beautiful. I watched a panel that you did recently with Alex Marzano-Lesnovich, who's one of my very favorite writers, and a few other people. And one of the conversations that came up was about how these memoirs, both of us, I think, spent about a decade on our books, and that the shape clicked in the last year. after, I mean, 10 years of work, and suddenly you can write it. What clicked? What happened?
Yeah, the structure was really the most challenging and kind of infuriating aspect of this. Getting all the pieces to make sense together, getting them to flow and feel like one coherent thing that had a direction and not just a cool stuff shelf of facts, you know? And yeah, I finally, I mean, what clicked, I think, was, you know, I found the kind of the braided structure, the general shape of the relationship between the different narrative threads. But then the thing that made it finally actually fall into place and find the structure that it had in the end was when I realized that the braid was too rigid, and that keeping, you know, I had been alternating chapter by chapter, like a chapter about my father's life and art, and then a chapter about my life, and then a chapter about my father. And it felt very stiff, and it wasn't allowing for all of that circular kind of, you know, chasing myself without realizing it, stuff that was in there. You know, I felt like I was siloing the different stories apart from each other rather than letting them really mesh together. And so it was realizing that I needed to break down that structure a little bit. It was a middle of the night note that I wrote myself. I like sat up half asleep and wrote less of a braid, more of a tapestry. And then I woke up in the morning and was like, what does that mean? But then when I started thinking about it in terms of the shape, it was like, okay, yes, that does make sense. You know, more just like interweaving on the granular level instead of these very separate strands.
Yeah, I feel like so much of good memoir, especially this kind of memoir, is an unmasking, and even when you're writing about someone else, you wrote a dadwar. I call my book a momwar. You know, you're trying to write someone else's story, and I was very reluctant to be part of the book. I didn't want to, and I think you mentioned at a point that was something that you went through as well. And you know, our brain does such elaborate magic acts to protect us from seeing ourselves and seeing our parents, which are iterations of ourselves. So that's absolutely essential to this book working. You know, but it's something, it's amazing how long it can take to get to those places. I love in this book how, and at the beginning, I think you're pretty aware of it as you describe it, that part of, you have to write this book so that you can have an ongoing relationship with Papa because he's gone. And in order for there to be an ongoing relationship, it has to change. It has to continuously evolve, which is really the magic of this story. And I was thinking about how part of growing up, one of the rituals of growing up is unmasking our parents, is that moment of coming to realize that our parents are human. And I think there's this a really natural trauma response is for one parent to be canonized and the other one to be demonized. And so the unmasking is seeing them in all their complexity and then being forced to see ourselves in that complexity. And you have to trick yourself into it.
Yeah, I set out to do all of that. You know, yeah, if I had known, yeah, it never would have occurred to me or been visible or accessible to me what the story ended up being, you know? So as much as I was really frustrated at many points along the process at how long it was taking, you know, looking back on it, it's clear that it had to take that really circuitous route, yeah, to get through those mental roadblocks.
I noticed last night at like 3 a.m. I don't know why I was up at 3 a.m, but there you go. That you say in your acknowledgements, you thank the editors who turned down earlier drafts of this book. And I absolutely love that. And I really relate to it because I home bake shopped in 2009 and was roundly rejected. And I think sometimes of what a waste it would have been if it had been published then.
Right, yeah. I wanted
so
badly for that whole version to get out. But yeah, it would have been a shame, really. Yeah. It just wasn't the yet.
I don't know what that was. I think we had alien interference.
Yeah.
Something interrupted very loudly, and I don't know what that was. So yeah, so I mean, it takes the time it takes, and you have to grow through it. I'm also really fascinated with the way that the narrator's relationship with the mother evolves during the course of this story. And also something I really related to is the reluctance to involve her. I didn't want to involve my dad. It took years to even warm up to the idea of asking questions. But can you talk a little bit about what happened when you did and how that changed the process?
Yeah, I mean, kind of like you said, that process of seeing your parents as people, it ended up happening kind of with both. You know, I just thought I was writing about my father, but it turns out, of course, I was writing about my father and myself and my mother, and kind of doing that unmasking for all three of us. And, you know, because I had put my father on this pedestal and blamed my mother for everything, it was inherent and necessary that in bringing my father down from that pedestal a little bit and learning to see him as a full human being, that also meant giving him a little bit of the blame too, and you know, finding more compassion and empathy and understanding for my mother, and realizing that she was a person also, you know. And when I started writing the book, she was the age that she was when she had me, you know. And so thinking about this story in that context and how unequipped for life I felt at the time, you know, kind of reconceptualized how young she was and how out of her depth. And, you know, it became shades of gray across, you know, across all of our relationships with each other, not just my father.
Mm-hmm. Also, I mean, I feel like it's something really interesting happens, and this is maybe one of the gifts to memoir, right? Memoirists, or at least those who work with interviews in this way, that in the context of my dad, like we couldn't talk about our relationship directly because we would end up fighting. Mm-hmm. But coming at it with a journalist's brain or a historian's brain, it gives you that narrative distance to be able to say, you know, to really just want to get to the truth, whether it's the truth you want to hear or not, whether it's comfortable or not. It pulls the emotions out of the equation. And I think it had the same effect for my dad too, that in feeling like he was participating in a project, the project becomes more important than the relationship. And it allowed us to work through so many of our hangups and troubled history.
Yeah, I think it gives you a shared goal.
Yeah.
You know, a container for the conversation where you're both trying to get at the story rather than like fighting with each other over who's right and who was more harmed and whose version is correct, and, you know, all of that. Yeah, it really, it allows for conversations that, I don't think we would have been able to have otherwise.
Right. And then there's also a certain amount of gratitude. I mean, I felt so grateful to my dad for taking the time and for being honest and like willing to talk about the things that were embarrassing to him or things that he knew he would get judged for, and to just be kind of willing to put it all out there without being defensive. And that takes a lot of maturity. So it's time too.
Yeah, it's a gift of vulnerability. Mm-hmm. You know, they don't have to do, right? We volunteered to do this and to put all of our stuff out there, and kind of like drag them along with us. And so being willing, and not only willing, but, you know, generous and cooperative is, I definitely had several moments of like, you know, stopping to appreciate that, especially after we had a really especially difficult conversation, I'd hang up the phone and realize she didn't have to tell me all that,
Right.
but I'm glad she did, because what an important piece of the puzzle.
And that growing compassion and sympathy for her really comes across beautifully. I realize that I have been wanting to say to the folks out there that if you have questions for Lilly or for myself, but especially for Lilly, please put them in the chat, and we'll get to an audience Q&A pretty soon here. Evan, if you want to send questions over at any time. I guess he was gonna. Okay. So I know this comes up kind of late in the book, and I don't want to spoil anything, but I'm so interested in the title of the book. I found the title and then what it represents in the story to be so eloquent. Is that something that you're up for talking about?
Yeah, I don't think it, I won't give away the scene that makes it all click into place or anything, but just as a concept, the original title of the book for years, the working title was Hunter Hunted, named after one of my dad's series, which felt most directly connected to the project of the book. It was one of those really serendipitous moments of realizing that I was doing some of the same inquiry that he had been doing, but then I realized that that was a title that only made sense after you read the book. You have to know about the series and the deer imagery and everything that represented to him for that to make sense as, the title of the book. And I polled a few people, like, what do you think when you hear this? And somebody was like, I don't know, what is your dad's name, Hunter? I was like, okay, never mind. I'm gonna scrap that. That's not what I was going for with that. So I kind of went back to the drawing board and was thinking, what is an art term that everybody is familiar with that will make sense, that has some metaphorical resonance? And I've been thinking so much about the idea of silhouette while writing this book, and thinking that what I was doing and the most complete picture I could hope to capture would still just be the outline, would be the silhouette, and that I could never, as successful of a spell as I was casting with this book, I could never fully actually bring him to life on the page or in the room. And so I was thinking about outline and silhouette, and then, what is in the silhouette is the negative space. So just fit.
It also got me thinking about how much of a presence the absence is. And so the Joe's absence from the narrator's life becomes a kind of presence. It's a kind of company, in the same way that negative space is a full figure on the page that has its own dimensions and its own weight. And so I thought that was really beautiful as a way to think about this story.
Yeah, describing absence is difficult. It's so much more abstract than describing presence. But yeah, the visual translation was what made it kind of click for me. Is defining that shape and how both are present, both the figure that you're drawing and also the shape around it.
Let's talk about hometowns a little bit. Let's talk about New York a little bit. I love how you talk about your claim to a particular version of New York, and how important that becomes. And of course, I relate to it very much as a daughter of San Francisco, and I think in some ways it is just natural to being born of a city that is constantly changing, because your version is always threatened.
Yeah. I think that's constantly changing, and also that is so widely claimed.
Yeah.
New York and San Francisco are both places that people flock to. They're places that people go in their young adulthood to find themselves or recreate themselves or whatever. And that's good and necessary, and part of what gives both of these cities their energy, but it also means that there always are people who are not from there claiming it as their own, which I think just inherently is going to put, you know, us hometown kids on the defensive a little bit, and make us feel the need to stake a claim that is separate from that.
And we're so outnumbered.
Yeah.
There's no stopping the tide of outsiders just running roughshod. But you talk in a particular moment about the smell of New York City sidewalks, wet sidewalks in the summer, and it's that kind of deep homey connection that you can't get everywhere else, and that you can't get from a place that you move to as an adult.
Right.
I also really love this passage about Joe working on construction sites and hiding Easter eggs for future generations. Can you talk about that for a minute?
Yeah. So him and his friend Mark, who was, you know, one of the first people I interviewed in the book, was my godfather, did construction together, but they also were just like, you know, kids goofing around always whenever they were together, even if at work, and would draw these huge drawings on like the inside side of sheetrock before putting it up. So they were like sealed into buildings. And I mean, I'm sure a bunch of them are still there. I have no idea where they are exactly, but I think about that in terms of that claim, you know, that we're talking about, and that it's like marked, it's built into the actual structures of the city. And I love thinking about people finding them, you know, doing construction and finding this huge like cowboy painting inside your wall. I just imagine that would be so cool for that person, and also maybe a little confounding and weird in a way, you know, in a way that also makes me laugh a little bit.
Yeah. Well, there's something, being a hometown kid, there are things that nobody, that can't be erased even after they disappear, even when they're invisible. And that was sort of what that made me think of. Anyone can claim a city, but your dad's art is buried inside the buildings.
Yeah.
It's such a literal, it's such a literal expression of that claim.
Yeah. It was very satisfying. It was very symbolically satisfying in that way.
Yes. And don't you just love it when they just give them to you?
Yeah.
Thank you for the metaphor. I didn't have to work for that one at all.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, yeah. So did,
There was a loud truck honking outside my window.
Yeah, that was a loud truck. So I also really, you have this moment coming up as you're going through school and you're getting to be where there's like this desperation to reach for stability and for a kind of normal life. And of course, as alternative kids and from unstable homes, I think we all have that. And then I also really related to the eventual rejection of it.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed inevitable in a way that in childhood, if you're given so much permission to be an artist, permission to be a broke artist, you can tell yourself that's not what you want, but it comes back in a way that I found really beautiful. And you have a cattail.
Yep, just jumped on my lap. Yeah, I think with so many things, right, finding the balance, like giving me a tie, finding the balance required some like overcorrection and then recorrection back in the other way, you know, and I convinced myself that I wanted to reject everything about, you know, that lifestyle that I was raised in, and that I wanted the matching set of living room furniture and the vacation house and the, whatever had symbolized this like normalcy and stability to me. And then I eventually realized, like, no, I don't actually want to become a completely different person than what I am, but I want to find some balance, and I do. I mean, yeah, I have a nice apartment on the Upper West Side now. It's not what it could be or what it was, but I also found a way to not reject everything about the idea of making your own path and playing by your own rules and prioritizing art over a retirement fund. Yeah. We'll see if I regret it when I'm retirement age, but for now it's working okay.
Yeah. How many people did you interview? I know that not all of the interviews made it into the final.
I never did a full total tally because I did not do a very good job of keeping like organized notes. So there's no like complete list anywhere, but
I think that's what happens when you do a 10-year book.
Yeah, it just like scattered for a while. I was like keeping everything in a notebook, and then it was like trying to keep a Gmail folder, and I don't know. It's like over too many years to keep it all in one place, but it's somewhere between 20 and 30, I think. But yeah, way more people than ended up in the book, which was hard because a lot of people gave me really interesting stuff, and a lot of people I wanted to include just because they themselves were important, and I wanted to, give them a piece of the story to tell.
Oh yeah.
But it would have been too sprawling and huge if I had included everything. So I had to do a lot of paring down.
How did you decide? Did you have like a, I ended up, I mean, my book is a hell of a lot thicker than yours, so I didn't do as much pairing as maybe, I don't know, maybe I should have. But yeah, there was so much that got cut, but I ended up having to come up with a system of rules for myself. So it was like, if a piece of information had to specifically relate to the brownie business, and I had to have a fresh first person account in order to bring in history, because I do a lot of cultural history. So in order to bring in that piece of history, I had to come up with these rules. And it took me a long time to decide on those rules, to figure out what would allow the story to continue to flow.
Yeah. My system, I guess, was more just continually making the narrative the priority, and paying attention to the shape and the pace of the story. I wanted it to move at a clip. I wanted it to be continually going forward and shifting and changing. And so there are a lot of things that like are interesting and were happening at the same time as this other thing. But if they weren't propelling us forward into a new part of the story, it had to go.
Evan, I think you said there was an audience question for us.
Thanks for this conversation so far. This is great. And thank you all who are tuned in. It's not too late to ask a question if you're holding on to one. The first one we have is from Melissa, and it's for you, Lilly. Melissa's wondering, you mentioned taking a decade to write your book, or roughly. How did you maintain a sense of narrative present during that time as you yourself were changing?
Yeah, that was hard, and it took a lot of going back and rewriting. Part of it was solved by the fact that the search became part of the narrative as well. So it was kind of part of the story that my perspective was changing over time. And so I just tried to capture that as it was happening, and also in retrospect, and allow that to be part of it, to show, how long it took and how much it changed me and how many other things were going on and changing in my life at the time. But it definitely also required some rewriting at the end to go back and make that a continuous thread rather than a kind of scattered, self-contradicting, smattering of perspectives. That was definitely one of the challenges. And I had to eventually draw the line and cut it off and say, the end present of the book is actually like 5 or 6 years ago, because I was like, I have to just let the story end so that I can go back and shape and polish what's there, rather than continually trying to catch up with the present, because I could have kept adding and changing and shifting forever. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be done.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't want to do that.
My struggle.
Thank you, Melissa, for that question. And if I may ask one for you both, just kind of following on that, I'm wondering if you felt, because Alia, I think you said your book took around about the same amount of time, roughly. Yeah, I'm wondering if you two, do you feel like, since you captured this a lot of your own lives in your first book, do you feel like your life is this a new phase that has begun? How does that feel?
I mean, yes, but also it's like I'm very much still in this transition period, and I am like emerging from the chrysalis of this book right now, and I'm not fully out of it yet. I'm still talking about it every day and thinking about it, and trying to keep a momentum going with it and trying to get people to read it. So it's weird, I'm done with it, but I'm very much still, not free of it, I guess. But it does feel like, yeah, okay, now I can do something else. And that is exciting, for sure.
Yeah, I'm a year ahead of you, and I'm still stuck in that way. I think that people who have not gone through the full process of publishing a book don't realize. Well, I think people because I didn't realize how incredibly laborious basic book publicity is, and how much of that falls to the authors. And this is just the reality of the publishing industry today, is that we have to continuously post on multiple platforms, and we have to write companion essays, and we do interviews, and we do podcasts. And this is if we're fortunate and we get some attention for a book. And so this is all great, it's all exciting. And then maybe I've got a Hollywood thing going on. So now I'm telling the story all over again in a different way. And I am so tired of talking about weed. I can't even begin. Yes, I'm so tired of it. Yeah, so you have to tell the same story 500,000 times in different ways. And it's challenging, because after 10 years of trying to find the one right way to tell the story, the truest way to tell the story, then you still have to find another way and another way and another way. Yeah. So yeah, and I'm a year out. So Lily, I'm
yeah, and that's like, that's the best case scenario too.
That's
right?
The best case scenario. That's when you have a long tail.
Life, yeah, exactly. And I'm already planning stuff for the fall, and thinking about already into next year. And it's like, you want to keep this going for as long as possible, because you don't want to write a book for 10 years and then have people talk about it for 1 month and then forget about it.
Yeah, which unfortunately is an experience that a lot of authors have. So if you can you get a long tail, you're in the minority there. It's a very fortunate place to be, but it can be a trap. I have a friend whose book came out 10 years ago, and she's still doing publicity for it because it was so damn successful.
That's like so inspiring and also horrifying.
Yes, it's this is The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lack. So it's like it's a unicorn of a book, but she can't get away from it. She's still going on TV and talking about it because the invitations come in, and the story deserves it. So you become sort of, you begin to live in the service of the story. You create the story and you finally create it in the right way, and then you're working for it. Because I mean, I'm not going to, after interviewing 65 people and, you know, spending all of this time and finding ways to tell all of these stories, I'm not just going to drop them because it's told.
Yeah, well, and it kind of feels like that. I mean, in my experience, at least, it felt that way like halfway through the process of writing it. Like, I am no longer driving this car. You know, I am now doing what this story wants me to do, you know, and I'm now in its service. So I guess that's, you know, just make sure you pick something that you really, really care about enough to talk about. I
don't even smoke weed though. Like I can't get, I don't even consume cannabis, and I cannot get away from it. It's yeah, I don't know that there is a topic that I would never get tired of talking about. Right. But this is not something to complain about. And I'm so excited for all of the wonderful press you've been getting. Every word of it is deserved, because this book is phenomenal.
I'm popping back in because I have another audience question. This one comes from Peg. Hi, Peg. Peg is wondering, this is for you, Lilly. Did you have any techniques to help you remember things that you didn't or that were vague? Hypnosis, perhaps? Or were you okay with not remembering?
Yeah, when I started writing, a lot of my memory was vague, especially the stuff in early childhood, you know? So, but I found that the more I wrote about it, the more it came back, you know? And if you write one scene, then you start to remember another time that you were in that place, or another time you were talking to that person, or whatever. And it's like the silk scarves, you just keep pulling and more come out. But I tried to just make the most out of what I could remember. You know, like the scene that I read, I was transparent about the fact that most of what I remember from the first part of that scene was just that one flash of an image, which is what a lot of my childhood memories are. You know, I don't remember whole fleshed out scenes, except, you know, a couple. I remember "Don't talk to ladies who carry spoons in their purses," because that's a line of dialogue that will just like jam itself into your brain. You know, I remember that moment, but a lot of them were flashes, sense memories, like the water cooking off concrete in the summer, you know, and so I just tried to milk the little bits of things that I did remember for as much, you know, narrative and metaphorical and emotional mileage as I could get out of them, in addition to, you know, letting one memory lead to another, and also talking to people. You know, interviewing helps bring up your own memories too. Other people will say things that will spark memories for you and remind you of things that you would have completely forgotten otherwise. And a lot of people shared photographs and letters, and, you know, all of those things are cues that will unlock more memories for you too.
I think also that also making space for emptiness and the lack of memory, the negative space, the lack of memory, was for me as a writer, it was kind of a breakthrough, and it seems like a simple thing. But when I realized that it was sometimes more powerful to not remember something and talk about the frustration of not remembering, or not knowing if you can trust your memory, or not knowing if you can trust the stories you've been told as you do your interviews, or if you do an interview and someone contradicts your memory, just put that on the page.
Yeah, that's not a problem. That's like,
it's a gift.
Story.
Yeah, there's what is juicier than a contradiction and a false memory or a lie? Like, what's more exciting than that, really? in narrative. Yeah, I used to think that I came to writing really late, and I used to think that I was not meant to be a writer, or couldn't write about my family or anything like that, because I didn't keep journals. I didn't have a lot of memories. You don't need them. You don't need memories.
Yeah, you know, I kept journals as a teenager, and not a lot in there is usable. It's just like whatever, like teenage stoned rambling, and then it's nothing to do with like, there are no dates and times and like specific details of events. It's just like things that I thought are funny or weird or, you know, yeah, grocery lists and
Like some embarrassing crush. Some
yeah,
like,
a lot of like, and there are a lot of like, you know, some of my good friends and I used to like pass our notebooks around and write each other like love notes in them, and like I have a bunch of those, and those are really like sweet, and I'm glad to have them. They don't give me a lot of like narrative detail to go on. They're, you know, sentimental little tokens, but yeah.
So poetry books next from each of you. What are you guys working on?
I am working on
you first.
I'm working on a proposal for an essay collection. I think partly because of what we were just talking about, right? Living inside one story for so long, I want to set myself up for more bite-sized pieces, and be able to talk about a variety of things and be able to, you know, write a story and then move on and write the next story. Even though, you know, the essays I want to write are all big and complicated, they're not 80,000 words, they're, you know, 5,000 words, which feels much more manageable to me right now.
I'm working on another whopper, another tenure book. I hope it's not a tenure book. What's that?
So yeah, I know about
yeah. My family continues to be bizarre. I have an inherited ghost story about my great grandmother's supposed marriage to a ghost that she wrote about extensively. So I have her memoirs about this this invisible man who she was involved with, and I'm working with that, and it's a big old mess that's going to take forever to figure out.
Does it feel any?
An essay would be nice.
Yeah, right. I want, like, the second time around, does it feel any less like overwhelming or confusing, or no, just as much of a beast the second time?
No. No. Yeah, you would think that after going down that road once, that you might have a better sense of how to do it. There are some things. I mean, I have confidence in my ability to complete a Mastodon project now, and so that's right. I mean, that's important to just have that sense of it. I will get there eventually. I believe that I will get there eventually. And until I finished this, I had a lot of concern that I never would, that I'd never figure it out. So there's a way in which it's easier, but at the same time, the reality of figuring out structure and the unmasking of ourselves and the people we write about that we have to do in memoir, that doesn't get any easier. You still hide things from yourself, no matter how honest you want to be, or at least I do. And so that's frustrating. I want to just like, I know how to do this now. I don't know how to do it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I kind of hoped you'd just be like, yeah, now I know what to do. But no, I kind of figured that was not going to be the case. No.
I'm fishing in the same way. Yeah.
I think the book where you know everything about it, like that's not a great book to read, you know, for me at least.
Yes.
Yeah. Like, yeah. I don't know. As much as I like love cookie cutter type books.
I don't.
Yeah,
I don't like.
exactly.
I don't like happy endings. I don't like cookie cutters. I don't like endings that answer the question at the beginning. In or in essays, I just find it interesting. I think that sometimes you can tell when a writer starts an essay knowing what they want to express, and there's something a little stagnant about it. It's so much more exciting on the page when there's confusion. So I guess that's a lesson that should make things easier, is just knowing to trust the confusion and lean into it. It doesn't make it easier to do, but knowing that confusion is the way through. But it's still figuring out the driving question. And again, that's one of the things I love so much about Negative Space, is how clearly the questions evolve. I aspire to be that clear. I mean, I just think it's really beautifully done. But making space for mystery, making space for confusion, and allowing the confusion to be kind of big enough and dominant enough to allow that to tell the story, to allow the mystery to really happen, is such a magical thing in a book. As a reader, it's hard as a writer, it's frustrating, but as a reader, it's magical.
Yeah, that was, for a while I struggled with how I was going to make readers who had never met my father care about, what the rabbits meant and what the people meant, and, and all that stuff that is like inherently interesting to me as his daughter, but what are the stakes for a reader?
Yeah.
Right. And then, when I started to think of it as a mystery, right? Everybody loves a good detective story, right? And if you can build in those breadcrumb questions and clues and make it about the search, then readers have a reason to turn the page.
Yeah, I mean, you instantly identify with that, you instantly sympathize with the person. And I think that some of that also to Melissa, who asked the question earlier, about maintaining a sense of narrative present as you go. So I think a lot of that is backfill too. Again, it's all, I mean, if it feels magical to read, it's an illusion. It's just, I mean, it's labor, it's not magic, right? So leaning into the mystery and all of that is like, you have to do that to figure out what the interesting points to hit are. And then eventually you have to make a decision about, okay, this is the shape and here are the questions as they progress, and then go back and make sure that it's all happening in one voice, so that unifying narrative voice between the journalist voice and the voice of the daughter, or whatever permutation of it you're working in, especially in a research memoir or any kind of a hybrid form. Eventually the voice has to feel unified, but that's something that happens at the end. I think that's like, you don't write in that like solid voice, you're fishing.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you are asking all those questions, but you're not asking them in this clear, one after another trajectory that makes sense and is a straight line. That's absolutely something you go back and add later and make sure that each one is pointing to the next one, instead of the reality, which is that you're just kind of groping through all of them at the same time and cycling through them over and over again and circling back. And
Right. And also, like I find that a lot of asking the questions on the page as a narrative device, even inserting those questions often happens afterward, where it's this, you're just kind of feeling around in the dark and you bump into something interesting. And for me, I think there's a lot of instinct at work there, where I'll know that something's interesting without knowing why. There's a sense, this sparkles. I think that sometimes is like, there are certain memories that have a particular kind of sparkle, even if I don't know why. Why did that lodge in my brain? But there's something in there that's a clue, and then those are the places to to dig and get messy with and keep kind of poking at it and until a good question comes up. And then you go back and put the question at the beginning as if it was your idea all along.
Yes. Yeah, that's the secret. No.
I love that. I love that. It looks like we're at time and we're out of questions. So I just wanted to pop in and thank you both. You're both delightful, and this has been a really insightful conversation. Thank you both for joining us, and congratulations on your books. Those of you tuned in, if you don't have them yet, you're not going to miss any more of the event. Go get the books right now. There they are, Negative Space by Lilly Dancyger and Home Baked by Alia Volz. Thank you so much for joining us, and hope we can meet in person soonish. But until then, please be well and stay safe, everybody. Take care and go get these books. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much for hosting, and thank you, Alia, for a great conversation. And yeah, this was really fun.
Thank you for writing a gorgeous book. And much love to Booksmith for keeping the torch lit.
Yes.
All year long.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks everybody for tuning in. All right, good night.
Good night, everyone.